Hello and welcome to the Manitoba School Boards Association webinar on hiring. It's a two-way street. I hope that the people that join me can hear me. If you want to take a little note there, if you'll look at the top toolbar, you'll see a little man up there with his hand waving. If you just want to click on that and let me know that you can hear me and everything's a go, that'll help me. Okay, I see some people have checked in. Looks good. Thanks a lot. Okay, we're just going to move on now, and if I'm letting people know that if you are joining us as a recording here, the original air date was on September 24th, 2014. Therefore, the interactive questions that we're going to be addressing at the end will be unavailable to you, obviously, as a recording. But you can certainly call our office, and if you have further questions, in particular, you can contact your own division's labor relations contact, and they're often very well equipped to provide a number of resources for you. So if you have been in on one of these webinars before, you'll know that I usually start the same way, and I'm going to click over to the next screen here. And just to help me get to know a little bit my audience, if you want to answer these questions quickly, it helps me steer the conversation or helps me just know for future events what we might be addressing. So I'll leave that with you for about a minute if you want to read through those and look at this. Just for your own information as well, there's a couple of areas here that you will be able to see. I have clicked off on one of the options there, and others on this webinar will not see your responses. So please respond however you like. No one's going to see the answers except myself. So just take a look at the last couple there, and these are just your own opinion or what you might think. So there's no pluses or minuses for answering one way or the other. I see all the answers are coming in here. And I'll give you just a couple more seconds before we flip over to the third part. Okay. So there we go. We will move on to the next screen. So just a little bit about these webinars. As I move back and forth here, it might take a couple of seconds for something to come up. If you'll just be patient, and there we are. Hi. If you don't know me, my name is Janice Arnold, and I do have with me here today my colleague from the Labor Relations Department, Pat Denovan. So she'll be sitting there in the background while we go through this, and she will be available for any questions that we are going to have at the end. So for those questions that I mentioned, if you look over at your screen on the bottom left corner, you'll see a window there called Q&A. And then you can see at the bottom, it looks like a toolbar. You can type your question in there. It works better if you type your question in, and then Pat or I will be addressing all those questions or the answers verbally at the end. We have a couple of divisions that join us by coming in with one person joining at the board office, and there's a group of people that will be sitting around watching the webinar all together. So this allows them to talk throughout the webinar, or it just keeps things more quiet for those who are just sitting there on their own. So we'll look at it in that way. You can type a question in anytime you want throughout the webinar. You don't have to wait until the end. We will just address them at the end. And if you do remember a question further along or after the webinar is done, you can certainly write into Pat or myself or any of your labor relations contacts, or you can just phone the front desk and they'll put you through to the right person. So I think we have everything set there. So this presentation is an overview of the hiring process, and as the title suggests, there's really two sides to it, both of which you need to consider, and both of which can help you in hiring the right person. So I'm hoping I will be going over some areas that are new to you today, And just as surely as you'll be looking at the new job candidate, you should know, of course, that they will also be looking at you. So first, I'll cover their side and what you might want to consider so that you can attract some great employees, and then some things that you might want to brush up on if you want to then pick the right person for your division. Some things aside from just looking at their resume. Although they are important, salary, benefits alone, they do not make for an attractive, they're not the only things, I guess, that make for an attractive workspace. I recently had a conversation with someone who was looking hard at making a job switch, and he thought he'd found really the dream job. The salary was right, the benefits were good, the work was interesting, and even the bonus of a short drive home. But then he delved a little bit further on the internet and checking out a few stories outside of their official website. So, and then based on that, he started to ask around a little bit. He made some contacts and found out what people really thought of those red flags that he had seen. So despite being an ideal fit, he was actually offered the job, but he turned it down. And he had said he had time to keep looking. He was still in a job, and he didn't really need the hassle of going to a place with, he said, those kind of internal issues and disruptions. So who's the loser here? I guess not really the guy. He had good qualifications and experience, and shortly after that he did land a similar job, but it was at the competition, and the other place they had to start from scratch, start looking again. So while you may be checking out a potential recruit, talking to references and looking at their Facebook status, they may be doing just the same. So there are a few ways that they can do that. They can look up ratings websites. They might also be checking out social media of everyone from the people working there to board of trustees to whoever, and they may be using, for example, website news alerts. So these are the unofficial and external views from everyday people and in all kinds of fields. So let's look at the first area that I mentioned, the ratings websites. There's a whole range of them where people can look up companies, agencies, or even educational institutions, such as Rate My Teacher. I think there's one, Rate My Prof for university. There's also TripAdvisor for travelers that maybe you've used, or ratetrades.ca to check out renovators. Pardon me. Rate My School has just come online and will likely be populated with information about Manitoba schools shortly. I talk to people every day that use this type of information, and they are giving it credence. So even if they just look at that and perhaps there's a couple of red flags, it might not be enough to really say, no, I'm not interested, but what they might do then is say, I'm going to check out those red flags and see if there's something more to this. The question is, how do you respond when you see an unfavorable posting about your division? We'll look at that in a few minutes, but let's go through the other communication mediums that you need to consider. If you are, as you should be, already on top of checking social media prior to hiring a potential candidate, you can be sure that the candidates are also checking out you and your division. Is your Facebook page attractive to potential candidates, as it is to, say, voters that you were trying to entice earlier? What's the messaging there? Is it different when you're attracting a voter versus attracting or responding to some of your constituents? You might also want to think about the Twitter posts by trustees or by administration. Is it sometimes a bit of a war of words on Twitter, or what do the stories that you are telling on Facebook say about your division overall? I worked with a couple of school boards on how to make social media work for the division. Social media is not only about setting rules for the students and staff. There's a whole other side on how you can best make it work for you and your division. Consider the branding aspects of using social media and then use it to your advantage. Think about taking control of your division's messaging. Having social media work for you is a whole different topic, though, so if you're interested in that, you can contact me after this webinar, and we can go through some ideas there, or a possible presentation if you like. The third one that I had mentioned, and that was the website news alerts. You have less control over these, but you could be monitoring to see what people are saying about your division, or trying to make sure that the news that's put out about your division carries at least as much positive stories as the negative ones. Try a search on your division or some schools and see what pops up. If you looked at it objectively, what impression would you have of your school division or schools? Try asking an impartial outsider, because you may know the backstory to a whole lot of what is mentioned there on News Alert. But if you just take it at the surface value, what is it really saying about what you would like it to say or what you want? There are various sites such as Google Alerts or our RSS feed where you can set up specific alerts so that every time a story is put out about your division, you can receive an alert, and if you choose to, you can respond to it. This can also include blogs where employees or ex-employees or parents might decide to write about the division and give their views of it. Now that you've checked out what a potential employee might be seeing and the image of your school division, if you were in their shoes, would you want the job that you're applying for? What is your brand? Have you created an appealing place where you'll want to get where you'll get quality candidates applying? Just as a potential employee will be working to portray a good image, think about the medium that you're using to get the message out and the image that you want the candidate to take away. Make it easy to find out about your division and to see some of the positive things going on. So here's some of the questions that you might want to think about. How is your board branding its school division or schools? You likely have a vision, mission, and a whole set of values or beliefs, but is it reflected well on your website and throughout? What's the story it's telling? And if there are some negative stories on the news alerts, what's the balance with the good news stories? And do they counteract the bad, or is there a disconnect between the two? So here, I'll give you an example to explain what I mean. If there are negative stories about, for example, the lack of opportunity in the division, then is the response only addressing sports programs? That's only one area of opportunity. If you have a mission to provide well-rounded opportunities, see that it's reflected well throughout. And you can also say, is it appealing to work for you? Are there mostly disgruntled ex-employees spouting off, or are there also stories about long service awards and professional development opportunities for staff? So think about how you counterbalance that too, and sometimes that can be worth as much as making a direct response. And who's responding to your posts, and what are they actually saying? If enrollment has been, for example, declining, what message are you putting out to parents, and what are the current parents saying? Can the parents that love your schools sound off too? Have you tried to get a conversation going with them? Okay, so this leads into what to do about a lot of negative posts. How do you respond to that? Think about how you address the negativity and how quickly. If you do let it go too long, is a posting going to go viral? So even if you go in and see it, keep tabs on it and just see what's happening with it. But the other way too, you don't need to respond to every criticism and fall into, as I said, a Twitter war. But consider how you counter, with what message and when. Beware of that knee-jerk reaction, but be ready to pull the trigger if need be, and don't let a story fester. So it's that step back and say, you know, how do I want to respond? Respond so that they see it in time, but also it gives you a chance to give a bit of a measured response and do it in a positive way. So there are a few things you can do. As I said, a rule for some people is to never respond. And depending what the story is or post or issue is, that can be a possibility. However, you have to be careful. You can't give the royal wave with the back of your hand to everything. You can be seen as being non-transparent or above those that have elected you. Next, you may have to delete something from your website when it's inappropriate. However, be careful how much you are deleting. Is it just an unfavorable post? If the post is where you have control and can respond, that might be better than having them go underground to another site where you have no control, or that you don't know about, but one that is being read just as much as your site. So keep the conversation where you have control if possible. And it might be easier to answer yourself with a well-thought-out response that can reflect the other side of the argument and let readers judge for themselves. If you portray a credible image otherwise, that might actually be the best response. You may also consider getting other people to respond on your behalf. It may be in their own words, but something that will temper the first view. The important thing is to have a balance of information. Another way to create a positive image for future employees is to take control of the message and the medium in the first place, before there is any negative. Create some positive branding stories that you post to regularly and that have good news stories. It will be a lot easier to counter when you're already on firm ground. And finally, foster a sense of community within your workspace. This can come in several forms, ranging from community activities you engage in together, or simple office favors like recognizing birthdays or celebrating company achievements and employee successes. Then let your employees feel proud of where they work and let them get the message out on your behalf. Hearing from current employees is a great way for people to judge whether they want to come and work there. So from the employer side, the point is, just like the schools of choice for kids, make your division a school of choice for great employees, and the hiring becomes a lot easier. So before I head into the second part of the webinar, I will invite you again. If you do have a question, you can just see it over on the left there. Just type it into the bottom window in the lower left, and we'll address them verbally at the end. You can type that question in anytime you want, and we'll take it from there. Now, if you are sitting in a confidence spot and you can attract the best candidates, look at whether you are doing your due diligence to make sure you hire the best. It doesn't have to take long, but you can reap rewards with even just a little bit of time. So plan out all the steps that you will take when you hire, including who is going to do what, like the interview, checking references, doing a search, and don't gloss over any of these steps. So let's go through some that you should include, some of these steps. There we go. You've likely seen all of those job ads that are a mile long and that ask for the sun and the moon. Don't put out, I suggest, an impossible wish list that discourages 90% of possible applicants before you even get started. Consider and include the required credentials, of course, and some competencies or skills that will serve the person well in the position. Aside from this, and possibly just as important, think about organizational fit, the fit within your division, for example, with staff and the community. It's not necessary to list the entire job description. You can be talking about some of those things later when you get to the interview stage. And if you'd like to consider having your labor relations rep review your ad, I'm sure they'd be willing to do that if you talk to them about it prior. Aside from the required credentials, you can certainly include some of the soft skills, like good communicator in your ad and in the interview questions. But beyond that, consider that some of the soft skills might be just as important as a particular certificate. What about the ability to work with both staff and your school board, or the culture of the school and that of the community? These can often make or break what looks like a very successful candidate just on paper. You can glean a lot in this area through the interview process, and maybe a search of social media, which I'll get into in a moment. Also consider taking a step back on a nice-to-have technical skill. It might be something that can be learned relatively quickly. If you need the person to have a soft skill that makes them the perfect fit, why not consider having them learn a lesser technical skill, maybe something, a particular computer program, once they are actually on board? Okay, you have shortlisted your candidates and are either at the stage of interviewing or you're about to make the offer. Have you done the search? It can take just a matter of minutes sometimes, but it is time well spent. Consider the division that didn't do this only to find out that the contract was signed and that there was a serious but recent criminal conviction in another province. These popped up in news reports with just one entry of the name in the Google search bar. I will, however, caution you not to go overboard. Everyone is entitled to a life outside their work sphere. It is about, however, looking for red flags and not putting their life under a microscope. So don't be too quick to judge. It all depends what you are looking for. There might be a red flag, but a small one, and once you check it out, everything can be fine. Some people are able to separate their professional and private lives, so definitely do search, but most importantly, put it into perspective. Obviously, spend time on the interview questions so you will get what you're looking for. And if you're wondering, can I ask that? Try checking out the website manitobahumanrights.ca. They have guidelines for employers on pre-employment inquiries and interview questions. I posted a link to this site on our website at mbschoolboards.ca. And if you're listening to this recorded version and the link is no longer there, give me a shout and I can email both to you, or email you that website. There's another interesting website that you might want to check out too, and it's actually called invisiblegorilla.com. It focuses on intuition about perception. In other words, what you perceive or what your intuition tells you versus what the reality actually is. So think about that. An interview, or even a couple of them, is a lot to base a very big decision on. Some people are very talented interviewees, and I'm sure you know that it's relatively easy to find a few references that will have something good to say about that person. But what other investigation did you actually do? Where else did you look? Did you use your connections to find out a little bit more? If you think about it, it's a bit like a long-distance relationship. It's very easy to be on your best behavior for a limited amount of time, but taking the plunge and living with that person every day can be very different. In an interview, or just by asking for proof, it can be easy to ascertain a person's technical skills, but it's often the soft skills that make or break getting the right fit. One other thing to think about for the interview is just like you will do a debrief at the end when you pick the person, what about the pre-brief or doing your homework in advance? Who's on your interview panel? Do they come with a multiple of perspectives? And how will you prepare them? I've actually sat in on many interview panels, and I always found it very useful when we took the time to talk about the main criteria, the objectives, and the organizational fit. Get a feeling from the people that are going to be with them every day what they're looking for. Will you weight certain criteria more than others? It's just as helpful to clarify ahead of time as it is when assessing the candidates after. So, and the final step, check out those references. Assign the task to someone right at the beginning, and it only takes a few minutes to make that contact. Figure out what you want to ask them that will help you to get to know the interviewees better. And of course, it might not be the same questions for every person, every candidate that you interview. Take note whether the candidate has informed the person that they will be given as a reference. I was once given as a reference and I was called, but unfortunately I was not very keen to be offering a good reference. So that's something to think about. And you might want to see if the candidate has prepared the reference for the particular job they're applying for. Are they confident enough to just let it stand? if the current supervisor is not on the list, you may also want to ask why not, or if you can contact them. And if they don't want you to, then that's another conversation, and it's fine to ask why, but get that out in the open. Yes, I'm sure the reference chosen will hopefully put the candidate in a good light, but with some questions where you delve just a little bit further, you might be getting a good feel about them and how others view them. Don't just pay lip service to this step in the hiring process. Think about that particular candidate and what you want to ask and how you're going to get to know them the best. So just as much as you are looking for a great new employee, they're also looking for a great place to work. So think about what makes your division unique, what brings you and your employees together, and sell that for the next job that you're advertising for. The right candidate will come to the door if they know the good things about your division. And on the other side of the coin, it takes work to hire or bring someone in that's going to be a real asset. Put the effort into the search and it can be a win-win. So that's it, very clean and simple. We advertise that it's a 45-minute webinar, but depending on how long the questions go on, we don't always go 45 minutes. So that's usually the maximum. So if you found this webinar useful, the Manitoba School Boards Association, we can provide your board with more specific information. And we might do that through individualized workshops for your division by either myself or my colleagues from Labor Relations, or depending on how vast the topic is, we might look at a tag team. If you call in and have a discussion with us, we should be able to ascertain what's needed. We'll look at a few questions. If you're looking at particular questions, though they're just one-offs on this subject or hiring in general, our Labor Relations Department or your assigned Labor Relations person is there, and they can really help and offer you guidance on all aspects of hiring and the recruitment process. Some divisions also have their own HR professionals, and I'm sure they're a wealth of information, so consider using what you already have at your doorstep. Okay, with that, I'm just going over to the last screen here. And I do see there are a couple of questions come up. I'm going to answer them, but as I go along, as I said, if something twigs your thought processes or your mind there and you'd like to ask myself or Pat a question, we're both still here and we can answer those. So I'll read out the question first, and then I will go through the answers after. One last thing, you can also, as I said, email, and our phone number is 233-1595 if you want to speak to either of us or your LR contact. So the first one is one that I addressed later in the webinar, but it asks where to get information on questions that are not allowed to be asked in an interview. So I have posted the Manitoba Human Rights website on our website. It's a link, and if you look at the top tabs on our website and click on Services and then Trustee Education, then on that page you'll see on the bottom left side a link that says e-learning. There are resources and links that can be found in the download section. Okay, I hope that's clear, and if not, you know how to find me. Second question here. At what level should trustees actually be involved in hiring? Well, they can certainly be involved in all aspects of hiring the superintendent, and that includes all the steps I outlined in the second half of this presentation. As for below that, they can take a role in hiring assistant superintendents or secretary treasurers, and they may want to sit in on an interview panel or contribute just by perhaps offering some questions that they might want to ask or to check a reference. The superintendent is likely, however, to take a lead or at least a co-lead for these positions, and after that, though, it's probably not really necessary. The board will approve the appointment of principals, but they don't really need to be as involved as the superintendent for that, or the assistant or the secretary treasurer. Okay, one more here. I'm in a small division, and traditionally trustees are involved in hiring within their ward. Is this proper if they know that most of the applicants, or if they can be related to them? So that's a great question. Whether it is a school board within your ward or even at the level of a superintendent, I think you can say that this is where the trustee can take a step back. There are a lot of different considerations for this, so perhaps it's just best to say that all webinars are recorded and they've been posted to our website so far. So there is one on conflict of interest, and that might be a good idea where you take a look at this for a little bit more in-depth answer to that question. It's worth looking through. It will explain much more thoroughly than we have time for really here today. But if you are talking about a specific situation, you can contact me or, as I mentioned before, the labor relations person, and they can look at your specific situation, because I do realize for a smaller school division, depending what the actual situation is, it can have different answers or questions. So I will leave it there. If there's someone else, I'm just looking over at the questions box and seeing that there aren't any more there. As I said, I invite you again to write in if you do have something else you'd like to talk to along this line, or if you have any other ideas for something that you'd like to see on a webinar, then please contact me as well. Anyway, it's been great talking to you, and thanks for joining us, Pat.
Thank you.
We'll be seeing you again the next time. Bye for now.